study of the book of Proverbs. We are finishing up our actual trip in Proverbs itself with today's study. And we are in Proverbs chapter 31, the virtuous wife. A very familiar passage for anyone who has spent time in the church, for anyone who has ever attended a church on Mother's Day. We're very familiar with this passage, and so as we go into it, there's probably nothing I'm going to say that you haven't heard before, but maybe it will be an encouragement to you, or possibly it will be a reminder to you. Because if you remember, the entire book of Proverbs is dealing with our choices, and the fact that we do have choices, and that we are making choices constantly. And so when we look at this passage today, it's so easy, especially if you've heard this from a Mother's Day type sermon, to just, oh, that's somebody perfect, they live over there, that's not me. Or if you're a man, is to say, well, it's talking about a woman, has nothing to do with me. But every principle that we're going to see in Proverbs chapter 31 that this lady employed is a principle that we should employ in our lives as well. And so let me just really quickly, it's 21 verses. It's a lot of scripture. So we're going to still try to keep this at about the 20-minute mark. So maybe I'll talk really fast. You may have to turn your speed up to maybe make it finish within a 20-minute time limit. So, but let me just remind you of something here. This is a poem. It was originally written as a poem. Chapter 31, verses 10 through 31 is where this poem is captured. I cannot read original Hebrew. I wish I could, because I would probably get a little bit more out of the rhyme and not necessarily the rhyme, but the rhythm of it. So some of our Bible translations do a little bit better job than that. The one we're using in the Holman in our study of Explore the Bible here, it doesn't really, to me, do very good with the poetry side of things, especially in the Psalms. The King James does a little bit better version of that. The beauty, if you will, the rhythm of it is much simpler. But let's just talk very quickly about the poem. It is two different things. First of all, it's in the Hebrew, it appears as an acrostic. In other words, things like joy, Jesus, others, yourself. That's an acrostic that we use, and this would have appeared as an acrostic with each word, the first word of each couplet, with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, you may see this if you read Psalm 119, where the psalm itself is broken up into different groups under the individual letter or the word of the alphabet, if you will. It's also chiastic. We talked about chiastic a few weeks ago, about how it says one thing, builds to a point, and then backs it back down by saying it's essentially backwards. Okay, so it builds up to the middle. The middle is the focal point of the poem, and then each successive part, both the beginning and ultimately the ending, are what causes the middle to be a possibility. All right, and so it's just a parallel front to back, if you will. All right, so we're going to jump in, and the first passage we're going to read is verses 10 through 12. Who can find a wife of noble character? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will not lack anything good. She rewards him with good, not evil, all the days of her life. As we look at this and we begin to jump into examining this woman, King Lemuel, and we don't know who he was other than his reference here, is obviously a man who feared God, and he writes this poem to honor his wife. And so as he writes it, he points out her behavior and her patterns, and there are things that you and I can learn from and be challenged from. And the first thing we see is her commitment. This lady had a commitment, and King Lemuel was saying her commitment was to him. He says, I have found a wife of noble character. And because of that, he realized her character. He regarded her as being more precious than jewels. Now, the reality of it here, as we're going to see, is that this woman was committed to her husband. She was full in on this relationship and her care of him. And we see that in verse 11, where he says, I trust her. The heart of the husband trusts in her. And remembering that the heart speaks of the decision-making point of reference for her. And so King Lemuel, in reference to his wife, knew that he could trust his wife because of her commitment to him. And this is such a challenge because everything about us naturally, and everything about our culture, and even everything sometimes even within the church culture itself, teaches us that we should trust ourselves, that our dependence should be on ourselves. And that, number one, our dependence should be on ourselves, and number two, we should look out for self above everything else. And so Lemuel is saying here, King Lemuel is saying that that's not the case with my wife. My wife looks out for me first. And it was a reminder that this is a choice in this lady's life. She chooses this commitment. And then he says, she rewards me with good, or she rewards him with good, her husband, all and not evil, all the days of her life. And let's just remind ourselves very quickly of evil and good, evil and righteousness. Evil essentially can be boiled down to selfishness. She doesn't reward him with evil. In other words, she doesn't leave him out while she gets what's best for her. She doesn't allow him to experience harm while she does something that promotes herself. And man, this is once again, it goes back to our choices. This is such a challenge to choose others over yourself. I mean, it doesn't matter how old you may be, or what your situation may be, your financial situation, your social situation, whatever it may be. Choosing others over yourself starts and never ends. You have to make that decision constantly. And so Lemuel is saying here that this is what this woman does, that she chooses it. She rewards him with good and not evil. And what is good? She's looking out for his best interest. She's trying to do what's good for him. And now listen to me. A lot of times people want to use that as leverage and say, hey, you're not looking out for me. You're not doing what's good for me. You're simply doing what's good for yourself. The problem is a lot of times that the person making that accusation is also doing what is good for themselves, or what seems to be best for themselves. I'm turning around. Oh, yep, here it is. This is my go-to book. It's a book I use whenever I do any premarital counseling or anything like that, or any time somebody wants to talk to me. It's called Boundaries in Marriage. It's by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And it's an incredible book that points to the fact that you and I ultimately have to take responsibility for our decisions. And in a marriage, it is 100% both ways. And you can't pull back and say, well, they're not doing their part, I'm not going to do my part. Because you might as well just go ahead and cash in then, all right? So in any relationship, that's the case. If you're not willing to commit to it, it's not going to work. So, first of all, we see that she makes a choice and she's committed. The second thing we see about this lady that is so cool, and it's a reminder for us, it's a challenge for us, is that she uses wisdom in her work. Now, this whole entire book has used this word constantly, wisdom, 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 correctly applying knowledge. And we're going to see in this lady's case that she uses wisdom in her work, and that we're going to see that she does this. And we're going to break down 13 through 16. She selects wool and flax and works with willing hands. The first thing we see about wisdom is you got to put your hands to work. You got to get dirty. You got to do stuff. You want to have you want to live in a committed relationship, you got to work. The house has got to be picked up. The children, if you have children, they got to be taken care of. The pets have got to be taken care of. Man, you got to go to work. You can't just sit back and wait on somebody else to do this, all these things. We're going to see this in this lady's life, in these 4 verses, as she successively does more things. So verse 14, she is like the merchant ships bringing her food from far away. This speaks to a deeper understanding. She, number one, was she getting in the merchant ships and going and getting the food? I don't know. Did she know where the food came from? Possibly. So this is talking about someone who is learning and planning. And so we're seeing this. First of all, she puts her hands to work. Everybody knows you got to have wool and flax to make clothing. All right. So she puts her hands to work. She gets her hands dirty. The second thing is she has increased her knowledge. It's always so interesting when a relationship begins, whether it's a team relationship, whether it's a new employee relationship, or whether it's a husband and wife relationship. There's this stage of getting to know you where we're trying to learn about the others. And then we kind of hit a lull sometimes where we figure they know everything about me and I know everything about them. We don't need to learn any more about each other. And there's a laziness that begins to develop. And this lady did not employ that. She was learning. Look at the next verse, verse 15. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and portions for female servants. So wisdom, at this point, Lemuel has said wisdom looks like three different patterns of behavior. A willingness to work, a willingness to plan, and then a willingness to do what not necessarily everyone else is doing. We've employed upward basketball here at our church as a ministry tool for 20 plus years and 21 years. And I remember talking to somebody about it one time and going to another place where they were doing upward, and they said something about, what time does everyone arrive? And I was walking them through the process of what it looked like for everyone to arrive. And then I stated what time I arrived. And they looked at me and they said, why? I said, well, if everybody else arrives 5, 15, 20 minutes before the game isn't going to happen on time. So somebody else has to arrive earlier. That's like right now at our church, Pastor Derwin comes in every Sunday morning and turns on the air conditioner. If he did not do that, and he walked in at the same time that everybody else does and turn on the air conditioner, y'all wouldn't stay. I wouldn't want to stay. I'd have to, but I wouldn't want to. Or actually, what I would do is I'd start being the one to come and turn it on. And so this is this pattern of behavior that this woman employs. I mean, this is just understanding that something has to happen in order for everyone to get what they need. And so you just do what you have to do. You show up early and you do your work. The second thing here, or the fourth thing actually in this passage, is she uses long-term planning. Verse 16, she evaluates a field and buys it. She plants a vineyard with her earnings. This is not easy for us, and this goes back to accumulating knowledge, that this lady plans for the future. It's so easy just to do what feels right at the moment, even what is good at the moment, and not put aside and plan for the future. So in the midst of providing for her family, she is also looking down the road, and she is seeing opportunities and needs arise, and she is planning to meet those needs. Okay, so first thing we see is her commitment. The next thing is how she employs her wisdom and her work. And then as we go now, we're going to jump a few verses and go verses 23 through 27. We're going to look at the reputation that she employed and how it impacted everyone else in her family. Her husband is known at the city gates, where he sits among the elders of the land. She makes and sells linen garments. She delivers belts to the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she can laugh at the time to come. Her mouth speaks wisdom, and loving instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the activities of her household and is never idle. Her reputation. There's a lot being said today about social media and different things that people are sharing and ideas and different things. And here's the thing about social media. It's true about anything. Social media does not reveal anything to us that we could not have already learned through other methods. It does, however, sometimes serve as a billboard for foolish behaviors. In other words, the things that people are saying on social media that are maybe offensive or ridiculing others or mocking others or condemning others, they're saying in private conversations. Social media just gives them a billboard that highlights that type of behavior. And it's been a little challenging for me, having been a part of this world, this media world, where your thoughts and your statements are recorded, to look back at some of the things I've said and be like, ooh, that was foolish, or that was harsh, or that was cruel, or that was mockery, and have to own that, And the reality of it is, that's always been the case. The old statement, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We know that's not true. The things that we have said have always impacted those around us. And now, because we're now saving everything into the future, or for as long as we potentially can see it happening, our words are being recorded constantly. Our ideals are being recorded constantly. And so we're going to talk about how this lady's work ethic and her commitment provided for her family and the reputation that it left for her family. And I just challenge you, as we look at this passage, that we consider the reputation that we're building for our family. Begin with your immediate family, and then branch out into your siblings, and then branch out into their spouses and their children and their families. And then maybe if you have grandchildren and your great nieces and your nephews and all of those things, what kind of reputation are you leaving for them to be impacted by? When they show up somewhere and they say, oh, this is my uncle, or this is my aunt, or this is my grandmother, or this is my grandfather, what is the reception for them? Because this lady's behavior was such, and we're just going to look at it very quickly, this lady's behavior was such that everybody knew who she was, and she was very well respected. It begins by saying that her husband was known in the city gates. He sat among the elders of the land. In other words, he had a position of prestige, and what she did was not causing him any pain. I think a lot of times about how my words might cause some of my family, some of my siblings, some of my children, some of my in-laws pain by putting them in a position that's difficult. Not that we don't speak truth, but that we learn to do it in such a way that we're not making mockery of others. Okay, so her husband was known. And then it says she makes and sells linen garments. She delivers belts to the merchants. This speaks to honesty and trustworthiness here. It says strength and honor are her clothing, and she can laugh at the time to come. The idea here is this is a woman that is so prepared for the realities of what is coming at her that she can look to the future and be confident and secure. And this says her mouth speaks wisdom and loving instructions on her tongue. She can be confident of the future because she can be kind to the people around her. That's what a challenge. Can you be confident of the future because of your kindness? Or do you have to have authority to feel confident? Then it says she watches over the activities of her household and is never idle. This speaks to a lady who is not cautious. She doesn't let her guard down. So now we're going to finish it up, and we're going to look at how she is honored and allow us this to remind us that the choices we're making today are going to impact the way others respond to us and how they think of us. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. Many women have done noble deeds, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. Give her the reward of her labor, and let her works praise her at the city gates. As we finish up this passage, and as we finish up the book of Proverbs, what a beautiful summary of what it means and how it can be reflected when we walk in wisdom. The first thing it says is this: the spouse of this woman praises her. The person who knows her the best praises her. This doesn't mean that she was perfect. She wasn't. This doesn't mean that I have to be perfect or that you have to be perfect. But the person that lives closest to us should look at us and say they have the best and the most noble of intentions, and they are committed to me. They are caring for others, and all of the things that we've seen represented of this woman up to this point. Her children call her blessed, and her husband praises her. That's a beautiful picture of someone who is committed to God and someone who is committed to utilizing wisdom in their life. And it's a challenge too. Are we going to use wisdom in our life and allow these things to happen? And here's how they praise her. Many women have done noble deeds, but you surpass them all. In other words, he's saying, man, there's a lot of good people out there, but what you do is greater than all of that. And you know he can say that because it's his reality. It's what he is experiencing. And then he sums it up by using a typical standard of measurement for a woman. And then I want to sum it up by challenging all of us. Say, what is a typical standard of measurement for us? Is it a good retirement? Is it a good house? What is it? What is it for you? What is it for your family? What do you think about when you think about what you want at the end of your life? And it's easy to spiritualize and say, oh, I just want to be known as a good person. Okay, but what does it look like based on what you're doing right now? What you've done today? What you've done this week? Where is your energy gone? Where is your effort gone? This woman at the end here, he is saying, look, there's a lot of things I can praise her for, but the reality of it is her worth is generated from the fact that she fears God. And remember, the fear of God isn't somebody that's shaking or hiding, but somebody who recognizes the presence of God in their daily life. And so the reality of this woman is that she wasn't known by the things that she could have been known by, whether she was a good teacher, whether she was a good this, or whether she was a kind person, or whether she was known by that, but whether or not she looked pretty, or whether or not she dressed pretty, whether or not she had the right jewelry, whether or not she had the right kind of house or drove the right kind of car. What she was known by was her willingness to embrace God's presence in her daily life. What a challenge. What a challenge to me. What am I known for? My sarcasm, my humor, my intellect, my whatever, what it might be. I mean, I want to be known for the fact that I really and truly want to embrace the presence of God in each and every moment of my life. And he summarizes it by saying this: give her the reward of her labor, and let her works praise her at the city gates. In other words, let her be known. And I just want to challenge us to say this: what are we doing in our lives right now? What can we do in our lives right now? Where can we submit into God's presence in our lives so much that somebody can look and say, I want people to know what they're doing over here. If you're a teacher, not because you're a smart teacher, but because of your love for your students and the fact that you see the image of God in them, and you reflect that in the way you treat them, in the way you speak to them, in the way you value them, and your children, in the way you care for them and encourage them and try to nurture them in God's Word and God's truth, and your spousal relationships and your marriage relationships and all those things. Where can we be praised? So remember, Proverbs begins and ends with choices, and we get this beautiful picture of someone who is rewarded for having lived a life that honors God in every facet. God bless you. It's been great studying this passage of Scripture with you. Thank you.